Morning, everybody. As Erika already mentioned, I do this presentation on behalf of Jorge, who asked me to do it. He is not able to participate due to private reasons. And so I'm not sure if I can answer questions because I basically only read his manuscript. And so, but we will see. Yeah. Okay. Let's go. It's not yet switched on. Yeah. The loss of a loved one is perhaps one of the most shocking events that occurs in a person's life, often becoming a source of stress and discomfort. The grieving process can be understood as a normal reaction that occurs before the death of a loved one, including thoughts, emotions, and behaviors resulting from this loss or its anticipation. The relationship the survivor had with the deceased, the characteristics of the mourner, the nature of death, coping strategies, and social support, including religion, which can negatively or positively condition this process, increasing or softening its intensity and duration, and therefore the resultant suffering. Some mediums may offer a mixed service that is communication with living or dead people indistinguishably. Although all mediums are psychics, not all psychics are mediums. Yet, among their regular clients, a not fully specified proportion turns to mediums in search of a moral or spiritual support because of the pain of the loss, either out of mere curiosity or because of the failure of other recognized therapeutic forms to deal with the pain. Other people, regardless of their religious beliefs, may seek to communicate with a person they have lost directly through a medium, collectively through a spiritualist cult, or through secular mediums who are defined as individuals who are used as agents to receive communication from deceased loved ones or other supposedly disembodied entities. Although many of these studies tend to look for test focused evidence with the aim of exploring whether mediumship really provides communication with the afterlife, or focus on the medium's experience, few studies have focused on whether these practices can provide positive health benefits for the bereaved. In exploring the therapeutic attribute of mediumship, only three showed positive evidence in this regard. A number of unusual sensory perceptual experiences have been studied among women who have lost their spouses that are not necessarily symptoms of psychopathology. If such sensations of grief are considered normal human experiences, it is because they help people adjust their loss and are conducive to psychological well being. Under those circumstances, people may feel less fear and inhibition when communicating their feelings. In most of these studies, it is possible to identify grieving people following their interaction with mediums, including continued links with the deceased in terms of relief, hope, spiritual healing, and resilience. Consequently, the question here is as follows: do a medium's statements provide hope and comfort to the mourner? But if consulting with a medium helps process grief over loss, two questions remaining unanswered are: do mourners experience a positive change in perspective after consulting with a medium? And does the intensity of discomfort due to loss and the level of hope or optimism differ between those who consult a medium and those who do not? The present study analyzes how hope and these perceptual experiences are related to the grieving process in order to understand whether a medium promotes these character traits or emotions from the phenomenological perspective of the mourner. It was hypothesized, and this is hypothesis one, that the medium's clients would experience a greater degree of complicated grief. And here I have to make a comment because he did not explain what complicated grief exactly means. So it means a pathological form of grief that causes a spectrum of health problems. I will go a little bit more in detail later. So that is, again, hypothesis one, that the medium's clients would experience a greater degree of complicated grief compared to that of religious widows, as well as, and now hypothesis two, less hope compared to that of religious widows, but, and that is hypothesis three, that a negative and significant relationship would be found between complicated grief and hope in the medium's clients. Two samples were used: 30 women who were looking for a medium to facilitate spiritual communication with their deceased loved ones. It's called the medium group. The mean age was 51 years, whose time since the death until the moment of completing the instruments was from 1 to 20 years. 56% of this sample was without a current partner, and only 40% were in a relationship. The second sample to compare with the median's clients were 30 women, all widows with a mean age of 60 years, who had lost their spouses in a period between 3 and 9 years earlier at the time of completing the instruments. 56% were without a current partner, and 26% were living with a partner. So he tried to balance these two groups, these two samples, mainly with regard to the religious background. That does not occur in this text. So, let's see, this is done. Now to the method. 3 instruments were used. A questionnaire was administered with questions related to sex, age, marital status, religion, and spirituality. 3 scales were also used, including the complicated grief inventory, the hope scale, and the unusual perceptual experiences questionnaire. And I will shortly go a little bit into this complicated grief inventory, because that is quite a little bit important to understand what he actually did or what the main points are. So the complicated grief inventory contains 19 items, and they measure the degree of discomfort and psychological exhaustion, such as depression, in the face of death of a loved person, along with thoughts, emotions, and behaviors following this loss. And this scale presents 3 factors. The first is memories of the deceased, such as the impossibility of or difficulty in carrying out daily tasks due to these memories. The second factor is feelings of emptiness, pessimism, anger. It's like in this Kübler-Ross study. Then the third factor is presence of the deceased, avoidant behavior associated with the painful memories of the deceased. So this is this scale of complicated grief inventory. Then the second is the hope scale, and the third he applied is the unusual perceptual experience questionnaire. I mean, these both are self-explaining, I would say. The religious widows were part of a previous study of 160 religious widows, from whose database 30 cases were selected, matched by age and time of their loss. For both samples, each participant produced a signed consent. A medium was willing to cooperate in the study with his own clients, small groups of 5 to 20 women who were gathered at the Institute of Paranormal Psychology over a period of 8 months at the rate of one Saturday afternoon a month, were summoned by the medium for individual readings, at the end of which they were invited to complete the three instruments. The medium's clients must have requested his guidance for the first time and done so a year or more after the death of their loved one, while the religious widows had to have been widowed for more than 1 year at minimum and had been married or partnered for 5 years or more. Now to the results. So we first talk about the upper half here. Hypothesis 1 predicted that the medium's clients would have experienced a greater degree of complicated grief than religious widows, which was confirmed, along with the subscales referring to the memories of the deceased, feelings of emptiness, and presence of the deceased. So we can see here the general difference that is really highly significant, and also these sub factors. Then hypothesis 2 predicted that the medium's clients experienced less hope than the religious widows, which was also confirmed, particularly on the optimism and hopeless subscales. So this is in the half below here. Here we see the widows have more hope than the medium's clients, and this is specifically in these two subscales, optimism and despair. So widows have more optimism than the medium's clients and less despair. Hypothesis 3 predicted that the medium's clients would experience a greater frequency of unusual perceptual experiences than the religious widows, which was confirmed, as well as the 6 perceptual modalities. So here again, we see the medium's clients had much, much more unusual perceptual experiences than the religious widows, and we see it in all of these variations of these experiences. I mean, that is rather to be expected, because people who are going to experiences, to mediums, they are rather expecting this kind of perceptions also. And then this is a little bit not so easy to read, this table. This is hypothesis 4 that predicts that in the cases of Mediumistic's clients, a negative correlation will be found between complicated grief and hope, which was confirmed particularly in optimism, agency, and hopelessness. On the other hand, for the religious widows, no significant relationships were found. In fact, overall, 85% correlations were presented for the mediumistic clients, in contrast to 6 for the religious widows. So I cannot go in details, but maybe here you can see the correlation between complicated grief and hope is here significant with the medium's clients, but not for the widows. That means that these people with complicated grief get hope from visiting a medium, while or the visiting of a medium makes them more hopefully, and this is not the case, that widows who have complicated grief then get somehow more hope. Okay, now the last slide, I think. Discussion. Mediumistic practices could be seen as a protective factor against the effects of avoidance and rumination, which allows problems to be faced in a different way. The results showed that the medium's clients experienced greater difficulty in processing the pain of loss, particularly in terms of difficulty in carrying out daily tasks due to their memories, greater pessimism and hopelessness, and avoidance behaviors associated with painful memories of the deceased in comparison with the religious widows. Such beliefs seem to be reinforced in the form of belief in a life after death, which becomes a much more solid feeling. A common characteristic of many clients of the mediums involve problems related to guilt, forgiveness, and the need for a reunion through the medium's message. Conversely, the widows showed more optimism and less hopelessness than the mediumistic clients, but they also showed greater discouragement and helplessness regarding the future. The medium's clients also experienced a greater frequency of unusual perceptual experiences than the religious widows in the six sensory modalities: hearing voices, seeing the deceased, smelling perfumes, sensation of physical contact, and other experiences on the threshold of sleep or upon awakening. A session with a medium could provide not only a sense of existential or spiritual well being associated with feelings at peace with thoughts about life and death. The experience contributes to resilience and adaptive coping, thereby providing significant positive value. Certainly, we must recognize that this study has a small number of limitations. For example, it evaluates mediumistic clients who have lost a wide spectrum of loved ones, from friends and spouses to parents and grandparents and children, in contrast to a small sample of widows alone. So, meaning maybe widows usually lose their partner and maybe at the end of life, so it's not so, maybe not so dramatic than if you lose your girlfriend or boyfriend or your child in an earlier stage of life. And this is the end. And yeah. As I told you, I'm not really able to answer questions, but maybe you can put the questions in the room and try to answer it collectively or make comments or so.
I kind of, I guess, have commentary. I don't know where to stand. I'll come to you, Mark. So a lot of my clients have actually had quite unfortunate experiences with seeing mediums after having a loss, and primarily because they felt like the medium themselves weren't very mediumistic, right? And so I definitely see a lot of benefits when there are when there is contact with mediums who actually do seem to have what basically what they are saying that they have, versus also the ones who unfortunately aren't you know really able to perform what they are saying that they can. And so it's hit or miss. I think that's really the risk. And so when I talk with clients about them seeing mediums, we do have to discuss, like, okay, if you do get out of it, you know, like, what would that be? Like, what are the best outcomes? What are you hoping for? But also, if you get disappointed, how do you think that will impact you? Are you also prepared to process that on top of your grief and grieving that like that one thing that you wanted to be therapeutic actually didn't help you and maybe hurt you instead. So that's just one thing I would ask Jorge about that. So, Mark, you had a question? John, I'll come to you next.
The main thing I would say is, for some reason last night I did a preview of reading through some of the briefs of things. I don't know why, I just felt drawn to do that. And as I read through this, I thought, oh, so this study is basically saying that they're going in thinking the mediums are basically are going to do a bad job and blah, blah, blah. Well, that's not essentially what this was saying, but it was language I don't understand. And so the only thing I will say is, yes, for this conference, everyone here probably saw that and was like, oh, yep, we know exactly what that's saying right on the face of it. But if Jorge, and if they ever get this out to a larger audience, they're absolutely going to have to redo that language. Like the way it says that in there about the pessimistic, whatever that was, that is not clear. And that will definitely make common folk who read that think it's the opposite of what they're trying to say. I think, I mean, unless I'm incredibly different from the common folk, but I think I'm pretty common and not for this audience. So that's all the thing I would say. And I know that's...
Yeah, at first, I also got it in a maybe in a wrong way. The problem here is that the persons who are looking for the help with the mediums that are different from the religious widows, they have trust in faith, and so they have no problems. But these persons who look for help with mediums, they had a much more problems before, and the mediums help them to cope. And if it works well, then they are successful. So it's not a failure of mediums that they have less hopes or so. So that is something that has to be clear.
So, yes, and Erica, this question might be more for you. When we have a lot of calls that come to the line from people who are having either spiritual awakenings or crises, and we're always maintaining a list of counselors or someone they might be able to go to help them through the process. But we also try to give them some guidance on how to make their choices, like what to look for in a counselor, as opposed, and I was wondering if you maintain any of this related to people with grief. Do you like evidential mediums, mediums who, or talk to them about what makes a medium seem like they might be more legitimate rather than someone who's just going to tell you a story?
Mm-hmm. So a lot like business in general, it is word of mouth and based mostly on other people making recommendations and saying, oh, my friend saw so-and-so, and that's how they, decide to choose that medium. But I do definitely, what you're saying, talk about, okay, like, this is what you should be looking for. This is something you should, like, in a good way or maybe not so good way, to say, like, yeah, would this person be the person that you would want to see as well? And I'm glad to hear that the Rhine, is doing that. And yeah, the best I think you can do is help people make an informed decision, and not saying, I recommend this person, right? But saying, yeah, but like, here's the information for you to see if you want to make that decision. So,
Well, and the difference between a medium that's advertising as being a medium versus someone who's been maybe tested and qualified, like Forever Family Foundation, Windbridge.
yes, yeah.
If they're available.
Yeah. And even that can be hit or miss too. Yeah. So, but again, like you're saying, directing them, you're saying at least there's another level of security, right? And that's really important. So, yeah. Thanks for the question. Yep.
I was just going to, sorry, I have the mic here and then we can pass it to Simon. So there's two projects we're working on at IONS right now. One is generating ethical guidelines that are, we've gotten information from over 100 mediums, English-speaking mediums, but I'm sure it could be translated. And we're in the last phases of doing this consensus method to develop ethical guidelines for mediums. Now, that doesn't guarantee their veracity, but at least they're committing to these tenets about ethically working with their clients, giving them appropriate disclosure, having grief training, things like that. So that's one project that you can look out for. And then another project is we're actually doing a review of mediumship certification programs. And it's not meant to say, oh, this one's bad and this one's not bad. We're not trying to do that, but just to kind of lay out, hey, here are some of the things that you can look for in the medium that you're seeing in terms of how they were certified. And an important piece of that is grief training. And I think some of the better training programs ensure that they have that grief training for the mediums, which I think is really important.
Simon? We've got one last question.
I assume everyone watched the movie ghost. Yeah, you haven't. Yeah, just wondering people's opinion about the medium in the movie, how she behaves. Is it how much is pure fiction? How much is documentary? What is featured there?
Well, definitely Patrick Swayze would be the fantasy element of that movie. Right? Sorry. I know that much about it. Does anybody want to comment about what Simon said besides my comment? No, but it's a good line of thinking, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there are certainly elements of documentary. I'm just wondering how much.
Lisa?
Kind of to comment on the last question. In my country, there are only two mediums that I was very skeptic about mediums for a long time until I met this person that was able to tell me without knowing me things that were personal between my deceased grandfather from 10 years ago that he passed away, and it was incredible. So that was the point where I got to believe that there might be something else. I don't know if it's telepathy between ourselves, she getting information from my mind, or she connecting to something. But you can see the behavior of this kind of medium, which is not the one that is advertising or selling, or she gets by recommendation. I mean, if I have a case that okay, I don't usually recommend to go to mediums, but when people ask that they want closure or they want something, I say, okay, look, I know this person. She usually does not charge, but she says that some people, they want it's more like a service to do some process. And well, that's, I don't know. I know she charges something, but she helps. She's there for people and helping them. And it's amazing to see her in action. And I'm going to plan a study. She's willing to contribute for an investigation because she's amazing what the information that she gets. So answering the one in the movie is far from what we see, and it's really hard to find someone that really have that connection, because psychics and mediums, like at least in my country, many people advertise themselves and they do nothing. They just are really good at reading people. Yeah, just wanted to.
Thank you. Yeah.
Only a short comment that is perhaps even a little bit funny, but also interesting. I think years ago, I was on a conference on Southeast Asian horror movies. And that was interesting because there was a tragedy in maybe Bangkok or so where many people died after a truck with gasoline exploded. And a few years later, they made a horror movie with such a, so to say, a scene where a truck with gasoline exploded, and all these spirits of the deceased came in, were part of this movie. Of this, it was not a documentary, but actually a horror movie. And then I learned from a woman who is living there, that the people came out of the cinema and they said, yeah, it was a good movie, but it was not as it was in reality. So they actually try to bring the reality and the fiction into lines somehow. So this is, at least they see some sort of documentary aspect in this, even in a horror movie.
Just a brief commentary. Perhaps it might be interesting to compare mediums who provide private services in more secularized contexts with mediums who provide help for people in grief in more religious or spiritual contexts, this might make some difference because you have the support of the group, not just the medium, and you have all this belief system and practices that may help these individuals. So I don't know, maybe it could be, the results could be different.
And we have time for one more. Sorry. Okay, you're just handing it out.
I'll be brief. It's not to do with mediums, but I think there's overlap that you might find interesting, especially given the concerns about what kind of medium, how people may respond to potentially poor mediums. Keep an eye out. I'm working with my colleague Kim Pemberthy at DOPS right now. We have IRB approval and DEA approval. We are doing a study with people who are experiencing prolonged grief disorder, which is basically complicated grief that is extended beyond 6 months. It's a relatively modern diagnosis in this literature, and we're going to be administering psilocybin to them with the notion that the mystical sort of spiritual experience that often comes with psychedelics may enable them to find some form of connection, interconnectedness, and awareness that perhaps there's something more, and that might attenuate some of the grief. So again, it's not the same, but I think there's some overlap there, trying to get to the, potentially what they're seeking here is some form of confirmation that there's something more, not just that they have contact. And so I think there are some ways that we're going about it at DOPS, so maybe in the next year or so, we might even have something to report about that.
Thank you.